as what the Ark is. It's a transmitter. It's a radio for speaking to God. And it's within my reach.
So the story is that, and I don't have any evidence for this, but it's important. My sister and I, we were with a babysitter who was like an aunt or something. She was taking us to Atlantic City. We were at her house. I don't know where it was, because we lived in Media, Pennsylvania at the time. We had finished lunch. She was doing the dishes, and my sister and I were like, we're going to go play outside. My sister is 2 years older than I was, and still am. She was 8 at the time. I was 6. And there was a cornfield relatively nearby. And we were walking by it, and I told my sister, I want to go into the cornfield. My sister went, I don't want to go into the cornfield. I, in what I thought was a rather uncharacteristic quality, decided I was going to go in by myself. So my sister stayed outside at the edge of the cornfield, and I walked in a little ways, and then I walked across a couple rows, and I found myself no further away, closer right now than I am to this camera. About 3 feet was my estimate, away from what I, for the majority of my life, called a giant grasshopper. It had the head of an insect. It was standing upright. From my memory, it had 2 legs, 2 arms. It was between the 2 rows of corn, and it had its hands, and it had these long fingers, not claws, long fingers, very flexible fingers, wrapped around the corn, and it was slowly pushing it to the side and looking right at me. It was not clothed, from what I remember. It was a mottled brown color. I ran out of that corn in terror. I got back to my sister. My memory is that my sister was crying and said that she had been looking for me and couldn't find me. Like maybe she'd been calling my name. I don't know. I was in shock. We ran back to my aunt, and I tried to communicate to her, and all I could tell her, I kept saying over and over again, it was looking right at me, and was saying it was a giant grasshopper. And she had no idea, she didn't have her own kids. So she just tried to calm me down, and then that was the end of that. Like, what do you do with that information? And I did nothing for, 40 plus years. And then I sent a text to Stuart Davis. And I said, I think I saw one of these mantis things. And he responded, and he was like, really? Tell me more. And we opened communication, and then Stuart was like, have you considered trying to use hypnosis or anything to uncover more? Like, I didn't know there was any need to do so, but I'm aware of hypnosis having a bad reputation. Because I was, I knew that people had been misled by hypnosis for the whole satanic panic thing in the 80s. And I didn't have a lot of confidence in hypnosis. But Stuart was like, look, it's not a forensic tool. You're not going to be able to just get, a straight story out of it that is true, 100% anything. But it could give you an indication of something. And so, there's no harm in giving it a try. I'm certified in this practice, and I know what I'm doing, and, blah, 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 and I'd be willing to do it for you. And so I ended up doing a session, and we got partway through it, and my anxiety was going up. And it got to the point where we ended up canceling. We ended up stopping the session because I was, despite Stuart's best efforts, appearing to be on the verge of like having a full-blown panic attack. So we stopped it, and I asked Stuart, in your experience, is it normal to have like this level of emotional reaction if there's nothing attached to it? He said, no, not in my experience. And I was like, okay, well, I need to think about this. And then I talked to my therapist, told her about what had happened. A little embarrassed, but I just told her all of it. And I said, I don't know what to do. And she suggested, why don't you try working with a different hypnotherapist who, whose focus is not aliens, and see if you can get any information. Find out whether it's normal to have that emotional reaction. And so I found a local, board-certified hypnotherapist that took my insurance and was able to schedule a number of sessions with her. And at first we did like half a dozen of these, and we focused on my chronic pain and my chronic health conditions. But, the pain wasn't getting better. And we couldn't, I felt like there was a strong resistance there, like there was a problem. There was something that wasn't being addressed that we needed to figure it out. I was like, I don't get it, but there's something wrong. So she's like, well, we'll do a session. We'll try and focus on what is it getting in the way. Lo and behold, we ended up exactly where I'd left off with Stuart. But this time, I guess maybe because I was more comfortable with hypnosis, we were able to get past the hurdle. And what unfolded was an entire session involving my whole family being abducted by mantis beings and greys. Medical experiments being done. My parents naked on tables. My dad grappling, like fighting and wrestling, not fighting, but wrestling with a gray. Seeing my sister there. And what came out of the session, and I was like, what the hell was that all about? And I can't express my surprise when my hypnotherapist said, you would be surprised how often I hear this from my patients. And she said, I believe it's a genuine thing. You don't need to be freaked out about it or upset. She's like, I don't specialize in this, but, there are support groups and stuff out there, but we can explore this more. And she reiterated, she was like, quite a number of my very respectable patients. And she, was hinting that these people are, I guess I'll just say like upper management in major corporations kind of things, are dealing with similar things. She gave me that impression, without violating any confidentiality stuff. So we did about 6 more sessions focused on the alien stuff, and it only got weirder and weirder. Now, unfortunately, she did not record any of those sessions. Now, when I did the sessions, I was aware through all of it. Now, you go into a very relaxed state, but I was fully aware of what she was saying, what was happening. She was not leading me in any way. And neither is Stuart. And I'm going to link to one of the hypnosis sessions that I later did with Stuart. And you'll see that. They weren't leading me. It was just in there. And now I'd been avoiding reading about abduction stuff, and I don't know where all this stuff came from. But I still couldn't accept it immediately. I mean, how could anybody accept it? And so I started trying to figure out, well, how would you validate such a thing? Unless this continues to happen and I can catch any evidence of it, because what the hypnosis uncovered was that this had been going on basically throughout my entire life. That it had happened somewhere over 20 times. And that I remembered none of it. I subconsciously remembered it, and I had tremendous fear that was associated with things involved in it, such as the mantis being I saw in the cornfield. I knew to have terror about that, because that particular one was one that was overseeing medical experiments that were being done on me. I don't have any evidence of this, but this is what I got, okay? So that was the one that was responsible for that, and so that was why I was so scared of it. There was another one, which I kind of called my handler, and he was shorter and bright green, and he was more kind of empathetic and caring. At least that was the sense that I had. He was concerned for my welfare, and that he was the one who was primarily working with me when these events were happening. Now, all of this had come out under hypnosis, and I was like, I don't know what, if this isn't true, then I got to say I'm a great storyteller, but I have a creative background, so could be that. I don't know. How would I validate any of this? Well, it ends up happening that right around this time, Stuart Davis, along with 2 other people, Jay King and Kirsten Blackburn, started a support group for experiencers called the Experiencer Group. Stuart indicated that I was one of the people that, they were like, this is for you. Not that they created the group around me. I don't want to give that impression. But that I was like one of the types of people who was struggling so hard with what was going on that they wanted to be supporting. I was brought in as a founding member of the group, kind of the initial crowd, so to speak. I got a chance to talk, or listen, rather. I talked some, usually my being completely freaked out. And I don't know what is happening. I think I said that over and over again. I don't know what is going on. I don't know what is real anymore. I don't know which end is up. And I was listening to other people talking about their experiences. And they're very, very different, all of these experiences. The things people encounter, these are not rational experiences. They're intermingled with our subconscious. As a result, they have a very dreamlike component to them, but they are not dreams. Jacques Vallée's research has backed this up, and he's one of a number of researchers who've been investigating this for the government and otherwise. But there is a component of this that is, it's like they're taking our subconscious and they're making it real in some way. And I'm not here to try and explain that, that's a whole other video. But what I'm trying to indicate is that these experiences widely vary. Because these are not materialist experiences. They're not based in physical reality as we understand it. These beings occupy a space outside of that and interface with us that way, or they seem to. But when people were talking about experiences where they were remembering, like being on ships or with mantis beings or whatever, and they were describing the things over and over and over again, the details matched up with what I remembered. The sounds, the smells, the colors, the textures, the temperatures, the architecture, the way they communicated, the things they communicated. Over and over and over and over and over again, this was happening. Now, one of the hypnosis sessions that I had, for which there is no recording, involved my being taken to another planet. I was just like, well, that's not a real physical thing. I wasn't in a spacesuit or anything, right? This doesn't make any sense. There's no way I went to another planet. Didn't happen. It's a psychological thing. They're like, or it was my brain telling a story. Well, then I was listening to one of the other experiencers, Robin Lassiter. I can mention her name because she's gone public. She was talking about having been taken to another planet. And all she did was she mentioned, I knew she was having encounters with other beings, insect beings. And she said she'd been taken to another planet. And so I after the meeting, I reached out to her and I was like, listen, I also went to another planet. We didn't have any other information. I said, would you mind doing an experiment with me? I want to write down everything I can remember about this. And you do the same, and then we'll compare notes. Like, we'll send them at exactly the same time. Like 3, 2, 1, kind of thing. To make sure that we don't contaminate each other's stories. And so she wrote down everything she could remember, and I wrote down everything I could remember, and we compared them. And not only did it appear that we had gone to the same planet, it appeared we had gone to the same city, but different parts of the city. I remembered being taken to a tall spire building, and she remembered being taken to a building where there was a tall spire in the distance. Other than that, the planet and the description of the construction of the buildings and the colors and everything were virtually identical. So what do you make of that? Now, that kind of thing kept happening over and over and over again. And it wasn't validation. It's not proof, but it was validating. It was telling me, look, this is at least not easy to explain. It doesn't tell you necessarily what happened, but it's the more that I was getting this information and all of these experiences, the harder and harder it was for me to be like, oh, well, this was sleep paralysis. There's no way this was sleep paralysis. The prosaic explanations that are offered don't cover the spectrum of things that a person experiences with these things. They just don't. And that's why when an experiencer is like telling their story and somebody goes, maybe it's sleep paralysis, they're like, dude, just leave me alone. Go away. Like, I'm not an idiot. Do you think I didn't consider these things? People don't jump directly to abduction, typically. Like, why would anyone? Because it makes you an outcast. I couldn't talk about this with a number of my friends, and some of the ones that I did talk about, I'm not friends with anymore. Well, that was a long delay between videos. I'm sorry for the interminable wait on part 2. A lot has happened in the interim. I'll cover some of it at the end. But one of the things that happened, I was dealing with some potentially malevolent entities in relation to my EVP work. And a whole rash of weird stuff was going on. And that included a really bizarre set of strange technical glitches where I would record videos and I'd test it. It would be fine. I would come back to it, do the recording, and there would be no sound. I would run another test and it would be fine. There's just no sound on those videos for some reason. And one of the other things that happened was the part 2 that I recorded vanished. The whole video, it's gone off my computer and off my backups. The computer gets backed up every hour. There's just no trace of it. Other videos, the same day, the same, same week, they're all there. That one's gone. So I'm having to record it again. I'm trying to get back into where I was at in terms of explaining things, because there was so much involved. It got so complicated. Where I left off, I was talking about being a member of the experiencer group. I started talking about the link between consciousness and our own minds as part of these encounters. I think I'm going to actually put that part off and talk about a little bit more of the actual circumstance of what was going on with me at the time. While I'm uncovering all of the, potential experiencer stuff now, I had very, very strong skepticism at the time. I was open to this. More and more things were kind of lining up. And it was right in line with, what's been described by Jacques Vallée and other abduction researchers in terms of how things are experienced, the kind of things that are experienced, what people say, what's communicated to them, etc. But I was also dealing with, this other phenomenon that I had talked about in part one, where there was psi phenomenon going on. There was really weird kind of poltergeist stuff that was happening here and there. Not dramatic, although just within the past few months there's been more dramatic phenomenon. It's unrelated to the experiencer stuff, or the contact/abduction phenomenon stuff. While more and more things I was uncovering them that were kind of validating for my experience, I was still intensely skeptical and doubtful. I was more open to other people's experiences than my own. But even then, I would really, I'm a debunker at heart. I always start by going, well, what's the rational explanation for this? Is there one? And almost always you can find one. But just because you can come up with one doesn't mean that that's the right answer. And so I was just going, well, look, I'm now experiencing a lot of phenomenon that in the past I simply didn't believe in. And now I know that stuff is real because not only did I experience it, but that led me to do research, extensive research on it, and went, oh my God, there's a ton of empirical data that supports that. So I've learned you can't base this off what you think you know. You can't rationally analyze it. So I was like, well, what more could I possibly do to validate this? There was an interview that I had come across. Well, it was a transcript of an interview between Dr. Kit Green and a remote viewer who was unnamed. Now, for those who don't know, Kit Green is he's worked for the CIA. I don't know if he's technically a CIA employee. I don't think he is. I believe he's a forensic pathologist. That's his degree. He's a medical doctor. But he's been involved in UFO research and abduction research for decades. You can read Jacques Vallée's journals, the Forbidden Science series. Kit Green's name comes up a lot in those. So this transcript, Kit Green was talking to this remote viewer about an abductee. And one of the things this remote viewer specializes in is medical remote viewing. And this is something that, it's not everyone can do this. There were people who were getting certified as medical intuitives. There was a group that was certifying them for a while. And in order to get certified, the way it worked was they would give you the name of a patient. And that was all they would get, just the name. They then had to diagnose the primary medical conditions that these people were dealing with at least an 80% accuracy. And then that was reviewed by a team of medical doctors who were familiar with the patient. And then they had to do this a certain number of times. And I want to say it was like 40 or 50 cases. So they had to have a very, very high accuracy rate. When you consider that the CIA's remote viewing program had about a 65% accuracy rate was the best they could achieve with, extensive training and practice. Getting more than 80% accuracy for medical intuitive is pretty phenomenal. So she was doing that in addition to doing remote viewing work on the circumstances that the people were dealing with related to their contact or abductions. Kit Green described this remote viewer as his favorite psychic. That was the term he used. And he said, on the things that she specializes in, she has almost 100% accuracy. Now, you can find the transcript online. I'll link to it in the show notes. The content of it is not important. What's important is that I was able to get her name. Now, her name is out there. It's floating around. You can find it I'm not going to link to that in the show notes because she really doesn't want to be connected to the CIA work. She can't talk about it. She doesn't want that to be what people reach out to her for. And effectively, she's not really doing medical intuitive work now because of liability reasons. And so I booked a session with. Now, even though I had done remote viewing myself and I was open to these things, I was still, I'm paranoid because I know there's a lot of fraud out there. And so I created a throwaway email address. I didn't give her I don't think I even gave her my full name. I think I just gave her a first name. And we did the session. There were, we started off by talking about my medical stuff. And that's why I'm not going to include the whole session. But then we talked about the abduction stuff. Now, all I told her in my initial email to her was this stuff came up under hypnosis that I had potentially been abducted. I saw a mantis being when I was a kid, and I want to know, is there any reality to what came up under hypnosis? But I didn't give her any details at all about that. Well, here's what she had to say.
The mantis. Yeah. To mantis, frankly, and I don't like to speak negatively of any general group, but they are not to be trusted, in my opinion. They're more the grays, but there are many different species that have grays. Grays are essentially part mechanical and part organic. They're like cyborgs.
Yeah, they featured in some of my hypnotic recalls along with the mantis.
Yeah, but the different species, and there are at least 4 different species that are in contact with our Earth. But there have to be hundreds of different species if you think about all the different planets there are and all the different galaxies. But those species that we interact with, many of them have grays of one sort or another, because grays are like machines. They're like robots. They are.
Yeah.
And so I suppose they have different models, just like there are different models of cars and different models of other things.
I was like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, I booked the session because I was like, I can't think of any other way I could potentially even try and validate this. This is about the only thing I could come up with. And I got it, and then I was like, I'm not willing to accept it. But I was still open to it. Like it could be. It certainly goes into the validation pile. And that pile was growing by the day. It just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I reached out to her a short time later, and I asked her, what about the possibility that the remote viewing that you did is simply looking at my own beliefs about the experience? And she said, that's something that is possible, but she has techniques to work around that. And she was very confident in what she got. Kit Green was very confident in her abilities. In the end, I've now been told by one of the CIA's top remote viewers, at least in relation to this specific topic, she's like, yep, that's all true, that all happened. Well, stuff started happening after that. I've had incidents of sleep paralysis on many occasions. There was a period of time where I was getting it several times a week, and it lasted for months. Ultimately, it ended up being related to some prescription medications that were putting my body... I was getting basically too relaxed while I was sleeping. And it was triggering incidents of severe sleep apnea, which I already kind of struggle with, and sleep paralysis. So I'm very, very familiar with what sleep paralysis is like. And I've had it a number of times unrelated to the medications, both before and after. And I had a few incidents of sleep paralysis that were coupled with semi-lucid dreams involving mantis beings. Now, one of them, which was more recent, and it would kind of be, I would say, my last conscious, semi-conscious, my last experience potentially with mantis beings that I am aware of. We'll just leave it at that. And the way it was experienced was that I was falling asleep and started to have a dream about a gigantic white mantis wearing a purple robe. Now, if you look up kind of the lore of mantis beings, and actually I'll talk about that in a little bit as well, but they're frequently cited wearing these high-collared purple robes. And it seems to be connected to kind of the hierarchy of the beings. But anyway, this was wearing one of those. But this thing was massive, and it was pure white. Now, the curious thing about this dream was it was experienced the same way I experienced some of my sleep paralysis, which was that it was from the perspective of my lying in bed, like I was awake but unable really to move. And this thing was like kind of on the ceiling and crawling towards me. And again, I say huge. I mean, this thing was, I don't know, like 15 feet high? I mean, it's hard to say because of the perspective. And I remember being lucid and being like, semi-lucid, and being like, you can't be afraid of this. Because that was something that I was dealing with, because I kind of had gotten the sense that when things were sort of picking up for me, like, and I was starting to really sort of get stressed out, stuff would calm down again for a while. It was like there's this conscious connection. They're just sort of like they push you along a little bit, and then if things get too intense, they pull back. And so I was telling myself, you can't be afraid of this thing. You can't let it know you're afraid. Like, you have to try not to be afraid. But instinctively, I was still trying to pull the blanket up over my head because, you know, the thing is terrifying. It put a hand out and grabbed the blanket and very easily pulled it back down and got right up in my face. And then I experienced a download. And the way I experienced that was, it was like I was getting a strobing effect of sort of a rainbow of color palette of what looked like what I can only describe as sort of sacred geometry or fractals or crop circles. All of these things kind of look sort of similar. And I'd had this experience 2 years prior as well. At that time, I was wide awake. I was lying in bed, petting my cat, middle of the day, and then suddenly there was this strobing effect, and it lasted like, I don't know, a couple seconds. And I remember immediately afterwards being like, what the hell was that? Was that a visual migraine? Am I about to get a really bad headache? I never got a headache. And I was always like, maybe that was a download. Now, the interesting thing was that right after that experience is when I started having incidents of mediumship. And so when I had this experience, I was like, is something going to follow this? Like, was this real? Did I actually get contacted again? And I started getting a bunch of incidents of mediumship. Now, more recently, that has started to make sense, because ultimately I ended up getting into doing the EVP work. If you've watched any of my other videos, that went on for about 6 months, and I was getting astounding results according to the researchers that I contacted. They told me, you're genuinely recording EVP, but nobody gets this. Like, it's unheard of to be getting 30 minutes of solid material like this. Typically people will get, 2 seconds or less of a response. Maybe you'll get multiples of those, but not just solid, 20 to 30 minutes of communication, which is what I was frequently getting. although it's usually class B or C, like they're really not easy to hear. I don't release them for a variety of reasons, or rarely do, and I cover those in my other videos. But it kind of felt like that was an ability that was unlocked or enhanced in some way, because mediumship is connected with EVP work. It's just sort of recognized you're communicating with spirits. It's utilizing some sort of conscious connection. So these things are connected somehow. Looking back on it, I think it was a genuine experience. And I do believe that they were, for whatever reason, enabling something. Another experience I had, which was, I think, maybe it was in 2021. It's hard to keep track at this point. It's been such a blur. It involved a sleep paralysis incident. It started off as a kind of a nightmare. Now, this also gets pretty weird. And I apologize, but this is weird stuff. And experiencing weird stuff is very common with experiencers. I'll probably do another video talking about some of the theory behind that. I had noticed a pattern with a lot of my nightmares throughout my life where they were experienced as if I was in my normal, like, everyday situation. I'm in my house, but it's dark. Everything's dark, and I can't turn the lights on. And there are all these things around me that are terrifying, like shadow beings or, malevolent forces that I can sense but not see. And I feel like I'm in this kind of weird state where I can, like, sort of do stuff and can't do other things. I mentioned this to somebody who works with astral projection, and she said, that sounds exactly like doing astral projection work. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. I don't really know anything about astral projection, but it, again, it's a thing that has been kind of validated by many of the researchers who are doing related work to the UAP stuff. So I was like, meh, okay. I mean, maybe I'm doing astral projection sometimes in my sleep. But this experience was like that. I was in my house. Initially, it started with me in my bed, and then I was in my kitchen. I was fighting with something, and then I was in my bathroom. Here's where it gets interesting. My handler, that shorter green mantis, bright green mantis, was standing in my bathtub. There was some sort of communication. I could not remember what the content of it was. And then I had a vision of a mantis being laying in like a rectangular, translucent box. And it had these kind of glowing purple hieroglyphics along the bottom of it. And it sort of looked like Klingon, like the written language of Klingon, these kind of sharp, ideograms or something. And maybe it was Klingon, like the way these things are experienced where it taps into your subconscious. Maybe I interpreted it. My brain went, oh, that's Klingon. We'll just fill the blank with Klingon. But before that happened, as I was falling asleep, before I had that experience, I remember waking up and I heard a really weird noise. There was this mechanical clicking. And it was like, but it was faster than that. And I remember hearing it and being like, that's mantis speech. Like, I knew what that was. And then blacked out. Then I had this lucid experience, and then I woke up in sleep paralysis. I woke up and I couldn't move for a short while. What I think, after doing a lot of research on this, I think some incidents of sleep paralysis are connected to the phenomenon in the sense that when these beings interact with people at times, they can put them into that paralyzed state. This is very commonly described in the literature. Oftentimes people experience it, like if they are consciously aware and they see, for example, greys in their room, the greys will have a wand, and they'll point it at the person or touch them on the head with it. Sometimes blue light will come out of it. and then they're paralyzed. I don't know what it means, but I think there could be something there. It's also worth noting that because of all the weird stuff I've been experiencing, I had a camera in my bedroom, and it recorded me while I was having one of these sleep paralysis incidents. Now, actually, I think I covered this in the other video. See how much time has passed? I don't even remember now. Did I? Did I not? I'll just cover it very quickly. In the sleep paralysis incident, I woke up. I had the sense there was a dark, black, heavy mass on my chest. Classic sleep paralysis. It's even called the old hag syndrome. Because it's like you have this little, brown, or not brown, like black witch or whatever, sitting on your chest, keeping you from breathing. This just felt like a black mass, and I thought it was my black cat who was laying on my chest, and I was like, oh, this is why I'm having trouble breathing, because I do with the sleep paralysis. It's because this cat is on me. But then I looked over to the left and saw my cat walk into the room, and then, while still in sleep paralysis, thought to myself, it's not my cat. Something else. I gotta get help. I gotta call 911. I need help. Like, I can't breathe. I started panicking. I'm trying to call out to Siri to move, to pick up my phone, whatever. My phone's on my bedside. Well, of course I couldn't because I was paralyzed. And then I wake up and I can breathe, and immediately I was like, oh, sleep paralysis. All right. That explains a lot. Well, the next day I reviewed the footage of that incident. And here was the really interesting thing, was I was lying in bed with my eyes closed, and I was paralyzed, right? Well, my cat did walk into the room. Exactly when I thought he did. Exactly the way I saw it. But I couldn't have seen it, because I was in bed with my eyes closed, paralyzed. How did I see the cat? And that was when another kind of light bulb went off, and I went, and this was confirmation. This was not like an epiphany where I hadn't had the thought before and suddenly had the thought. The thought I had going back to before all of the woo started, when I was having all those incidents of sleep paralysis, I remembered thinking, this is experienced very oddly, because when I'm in this state, in the sleep paralysis state, it's always from the perspective of being in bed, where my body is. And yet I have a 360-degree awareness of what's going on around me. I feel like I'm trying to cry out, but I'm not. Nobody can hear me, because my ex was like, you weren't making any noise at all. You didn't make a sound. But I could see around the room. I could see beings over to the side or whatever. What I think is going on is that is kind of a potentially astral projection out-of-body state. If you do any research into near-death experiences, people describe having 360-degree awareness of everything. When I saw this video, I went, this is pretty confirming to me that, in fact, I am not in my body using my normal senses while this is happening. Something else going on. How am I going to tease this out? Other people have done research on this. There's a book called Dark Intrusions. I'll link to it in the show notes. They've kind of gone through and done look, here's the evidence that when people are going into sleep paralysis, there is more going on here than just the normal biological, it's shutting your brain down. Not in every instance necessarily, but maybe for some people or in some situations. I'm being exposed to all of these ideas where I'm like, I don't know what the truth of these things are. It's not what the kind of deniers or debunkers are saying, because what they'll do is they'll take a tiny piece of the evidence, they'll say, we can explain this, so the rest of it is explained. And you can't really do that. You have to be able to explain all of the evidence if you're accurately debunking something. You have to be able to account for all of the evidence. And they just kind of do this hand-waving thing where they're like, well, the rest of it, it's bad memory, faulty memory, or, delusions or whatever. Now, when I was doing the EVP work, I got the opportunity to ask the spirits about abduction stuff. What I said to them was, I asked them, I was like, listen, I know we're supposed to be focusing on my spiritual development, because that was what they kept telling me. And they didn't want to talk about anything other than that. But I said, look, this whole abduction thing is weighing on me, because, I'm talking to people about this, and they're respecting me as an authority, even though I'm always like, I point people to, experts on this. I don't generally, very, very rarely do I talk about my own stuff in relation to the phenomenon, because it's just a single anecdote. There's so much better evidence available elsewhere. But I am kind of viewed as an authority by some people. And I was like, if it turns out this is all bogus, I'd really rather not be talking about it in this way. So I asked the spirits, is it okay if I do a session devoted to this and ask some questions? And what they did was they answered the questions right then. They came back and they were like, yeah, we looked at it. It's real. That's what happened. Don't dwell on it, a frequent message that they gave me. But I was like, once again, I'm getting validation. I don't know how much I trust the EVP stuff, because it seems to be tied in with my subconscious in ways I don't understand. There's very often when I would do this stuff where I feel like I'm talking to my subconscious, like literally having a conversation with my subconscious, although, it's communicating to me with multiple voices and personalities, and, they each have their own kind of agenda and story. But there were things that were experienced where I'm like, that's veridical information about things that I should know about, like, the spirit of the best friend of a friend of mine. And, it was only our back and forth where we were kind of like, oh my gosh, this guy is this guy? And he listened to the recordings and he was like, yeah, that's him. And he's kind of saying the things I would expect him to be saying. Not kind of, like definitely so. Was I using psi on that? I can't write it off. Maybe. Oh, it's so confusing, but ultimately, it ended. The EVP phenomenon has stopped. Everything I experienced with the EVP is right in line with the research other people have done. All of it. Except for the length of the responses I was getting. That was the only unusual component, but everything else is right in line with it. Even down to the communication from the malevolent entities. And that was what kind of ended things, was I was getting increasing contact from these malevolent beings who were behaving like, stereotypical demons from like a badly written TV show. Like a farce, like a children's cartoon. But the other spirits were calling them demons. And they were doing things like encouraging me to stuff, which is not really children's cartoon material, but the way they were doing it was pretty laughable. And and then in the last session that I did, something had been moved. Okay, just explain it. I came out of my bedroom, and there were these cat toys on the floor, and they were lined up. I was like, that's random. That the cats just happened to drop their toys in a line between the hallway and the kitchen. And I was like, okay, well, cats are weird. And then, I'm making breakfast. I go to open the freezer, and one of the cat toys is now sitting on the handle of the freezer. And I went, that's especially random. What are the odds that the cat, while I was making breakfast just now, came out here without me seeing him, was playing with the toy, flipped it up in the air, and it landed on the freezer door? It's pretty strange. And so I took a picture of it because I do that. Like if there's something that's a little bit too far out of the norm, I take a picture of it or a video or whatever and save it on the off chance that maybe later this is going to make more sense or is going to have meaning. Doesn't always, but often it ends up being tied to something else strange that's going on. And when I did this last EVP session, one of the spirits took credit for doing it. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to throw that whole thing in here because it's going to give you an example of these malevolent entities and some of the things that they say, the way they interact with the more positive spirits. You're going to hear some discussion about a pendant, which is this. I don't know if I got this. Some of you will recognize this. It's a evil eye pendant. I think it's also called a hamsa, used to ward off the evil eye. There's a story behind it. I'll tell it to you after the video. So this is a class B or C recording. The audio quality on it is not good. I can understand a lot of it because I've got God knows how many hours of practice listening to these, and there's some sort of energetic kind of conscious connection as part of this phenomenon. So it makes it easier for me to understand it. And I have validated that every which way from Sunday, going back and listening to recordings months apart and retranscribing them and getting the same things that I got back then. So it's not just straight pareidolia here. So I put captions on it, so you should be able to follow along pretty easily. Even if you can't hear it, if you want to try and hear it, put headphones on, preferably non-noise canceling headphones. Wired headphones are ideal. And I'll fill you in on the rest of it when you come back. I'm not asking you to participate, but I'm giving you the opportunity. So I'll let you speak. It's good to hear your voices. See, the funny bit is, all right, so there's a few things going on here where there's a whole backstory behind it. Now, at one point when I first started encountering these demons, I was pretty freaked out. And I was like, I don't know what this means. I don't know what they are. I don't know how dangerous they are. I don't know if I need to be worried. I don't know if this is my subconscious. I don't know if I'm hearing things. Like, question. Just a ton of uncertainty. But I was like, I should take some precautions. And so I had these things. So I have a rosary. Here, rosary. I'm not Catholic. I'm not even really Christian. I'm not religious, as a matter of fact. But I happen to have this because, I don't know, I thought it was an interesting thing to have. So I put it under my mattress. along with this piece of amber, which the spirits kept telling me to, like, hold on to the amber while I was doing the EVP sessions. Don't ask me why. And I put this little pendant, it was not on a string at the time, I put all three of these things under my mattress and stuck them there. Now, the story with this pendant is that my grandmother got it in Egypt in the early 1900s. She had gone there on a trip, and she got this from supposedly a Bedouin who had tied it into the hair on the camel's neck, and she bought it as a souvenir. Well, they're supposed to be good luck, and this one kind of had some history coming from my grandmother, so I put it under my mattress. Well, then the spirits started telling me that they were going to give me a download. And I was like, ooh, download. Okay, I know what a download is. What does that mean? Like, how are the spirits going to give me a download? What would a spirit download be? And so I was asking about that. What do you mean you're going to give me a download? Like, am I going to get a bunch of information? How am I going to experience that? They're like, no, we already did it. It took a lot of work to arrange it, and we downloaded ourselves, was what they had initially said, into the pendant, like all of us. I was like, what? I don't know what this means. Now, keep in mind, when I do these EVP sessions, I can't typically hear them in real time. I have to do the recording, process it, listen to it, and then I can go back and ask follow-up questions. The story that came out over a period of weeks was that they had taken this particular object, and I didn't know which. At first they kept saying the what do they call it? I think they called it a pendant, but I was confused because it wasn't on anything at the time. It was just this object. But then eventually one of them said, it's painted glass, it's blue and orange. Well, it's not painted, actually. It's colored glass. They could see it, and they perceived it as painted. See, these spirits, they don't know everything. I don't know where they are in the chain in terms of, like, higher beings or ascended beings or whatever. These particular spirits appear to be above earthbound spirits, which are also a thing. I don't know. Ugh. I try not to get caught up in all the cosmology stuff because I don't feel like any particular person has this all figured out. Anyway, what they told me was that they had charged the pendant with light. Now, they frequently talk about light, and light is something positive to them. When I do the EVP sessions, if I imagine sending them light, they respond. They verbally respond. They can see it. Well, they got better. It got better over time. Initially, they were like, we can't see it. One of them said, your downloads suck. No, your downloads are shit. That was what he said. No, he said, your file attachments are shit, which I thought was pretty funny. Like it was an email or something. But anyway, over time, the more I got better at visualizing this, the more they would say they could see it. But when I did the recordings, whenever I would focus on sending them light, briefly, the audio would get louder. The waveform would increase. And this has been backed up by the other EVP people who are doing this. Eve and Grant from Optimal Frequency. Eve's YouTube channel is Voices from the Void. All of this stuff, again, validated by other people, one way or another. So the spirits said that they charged this with light. One of them referenced Christ. They told me that it was to ward off evil. And they told me to wear it on my body, keep it on my body all the time. Don't take it off. Now, towards the end of the EVP stuff, it started to get pretty intense because I started hearing voices outside of doing the EVP sessions. Now, initially, that was all experienced as, quote-unquote, pareidolia, where the voices are, like, embedded in ambient sounds. Now, that's based on, other people who've been investigating similar phenomenon. That's not uncommon. The spirits seem to be able to modulate the sound waves of things and embed their own messages in it, depending on available energy being the sound wave itself. So I started experiencing that, and, for a while I was like, am I losing it? Is this a side effect of spending hours and hours and hours trying to hear stuff that's barely there? And so I made a recording of one of them, and from a shop vacuum, ran it through the process, and lo and behold, there was a whole conversation in there, and it was from these malevolent entities, apparently, and they were trying to scare the hell out of me. That is another video. You can look it up. It's called No EVP for Me, No More EVP for Me. Turns out there was other EVP after that, but that was happening quite a bit. And then it changed, and it started to be experienced as clairaudience. Effectively, started hearing voices in my head. Now, as I've mentioned, I work with a therapist. I see her frequently, typically twice a week, because my insurance will cover it. I tell her everything that's going on. She knows everything I'm dealing with. She knows my background. She knows my history. She's known me since before all this started. And of course, the first thing I brought up to her is, am I having psychosis? Am I, losing it? And we did, sort of a assessment. And the conclusion was, doesn't appear to be. I'm not having any of the other symptoms of it. But yeah, the voices would be typically classified as delusions. But at the same time, she knows my history and she knows the phenomenon that I'm dealing with. And we're both just sort of how do we decide? Is this prosaic or is this paranormal? Well, we together agreed, it doesn't matter what the cause is. What matters is if it's interfering with my life in a negative way. In which case, I was like, well, if that happens, I should go on medication that would normally be prescribed to stop people from hearing voices, because I assume that shuts off whatever part of the brain helps facilitate this kind of thing. And we talked about it, but those drugs have nasty side effects, and I tend to get all the nasty side effects, which is something I'm going to be covering in this long video. And so it was like, well, it's not negative right now. Matter of fact, for the most part, when I'm hearing these voices, they're positive. And I'm hearing them both as clairaudience and as pareidolia. When it's as pareidolia, it's often things like, we love you, we miss you, we want to talk to you, which is a little confusing because my spirits were like, you need to stop doing this EVP work because of the negative spirits. They kind of warned me, these negative spirits are going to be messing with you. You gotta learn how to block them out or whatever. By the way, I've tried all this stuff that people list online for how to block it out in books and things. It hasn't worked for me yet. I am still experiencing it almost every day. Comes and goes. It does get worse when I'm tired or when I'm feeling kind of disassociated from stress, because I'm under a huge amount of stress right now. Hearing voices doesn't help. But other than that, it's experienced exactly the same as the EVP was. The spirits are commenting on things that they're seeing or that I've been doing. They call out my name a lot to get my attention. Last time I meditated, my name came through very clearly. I don't know what's going on there, but my guess is that the part of the brain that people use who are practicing mediums, who tend to hear things through clairaudience, I worked that muscle enough to kind of enhance my own abilities with it. Now, whether it's going to go away with time now that I'm not engaging in the EVP or practicing mediumship or whatever, I don't know. I'm keeping an eye on it. If it does start getting really negative, then I will try going on medication, because the last thing I need is to have my life ruined by whatever the hell that is. I don't have to decide whether it's prosaic or paranormal. I lean towards it being paranormal based on the complete context of everything. But like everything else here, there's just no way I can validate this. Now, since I recorded the other video now, we have a whistleblower who has come forward regarding UAP stuff, and he's talked about the government has craft, they have bodies, these things are potentially interdimensional. Now, the spirits I'm talking with in EVP would be classified as interdimensional. I believe they're in either the same realm or a similar realm to some of these entities where they normally reside and where they interact with us through our consciousness the same way the spirits do. You can't separate out spirits and aliens, or whatever you want to call them. These things are all interconnected, and that's why I'm talking about this as right now, as part of this conversation about abduction. These things are not, they are inseparable. You should not think of them as discrete phenomenon right now. We don't have enough information. For all I know, they could all be one thing. I don't think the evidence supports that. I think there are a myriad of things. I've seen shadow beings. I saw one very clearly. I recorded it on camera. Some of the EVP stuff, a lot of it, I have made recordings. Not all of them are clear, but a lot of people can hear bits and pieces of it and go, wow, that's actually pretty understandable. And I'm like, there should be no voices in that. It's noise. I started with noise. One of them was a shop vacuum. If you're hearing voices in there, there's something really weird going on. I think this is a good segue from the struggles with the psychology stuff to the healthcare stuff. So I'm in the process of filing for disability, which is a nightmare, by the way. Anybody who thinks that a person would, like, say they're disabled just to get money from the government, I don't know how that's supposed to work, because most people are denied. Only 20% of people are approved. A lot of people end up committing suicide before the process is over. Like, my own disability attorney told me that they think that that's not a coincidence. Like, that the system is kind of designed to crush people so that they don't finish applying and getting disability. I don't know about that, but I could believe it. So I have a list of medical conditions a mile long. A few of them, fibromyalgia, small fiber neuropathy, polymorphic light eruption. If I go out into the sun for too long, I break out in little blisters all over the place. Cholinergic urticaria. If I overheat, I get a gigantic, horrendous rash that can trigger anaphylaxis. When that flares up and it's bad, sneezing will cause me to break out in a rash. Migraines. Chronic back pain, which weirdly is very, very common with experiencers, and they don't really know why. Health conditions are highly correlated with experiencers, but so is trauma. It's really hard to tease that out. Oh, I've got some undiagnosed autoimmune condition. I've had an ANA of 1 to 640. For those of you who don't know what that means, it's an autonuclear antibody. It's evidence the body is attacking itself. 1 to 640 would be typically diagnostic for, something like Sjogren's or lupus, because it was homogeneous and speckled. Again, I've got a list of conditions. I'm just picking a few of them to tell you about. These have been confirmed over and over again by medical testing and biopsies and, everything they can find. They couldn't diagnose the autoimmune stuff because it seems to come and go. When I saw the rheumatologist, he said, very seriously, do you know anybody else who has this many rare and unusual medical conditions? And I thought to myself, yeah, but all of them think they've been abducted by aliens. I didn't say that. While we were trying to diagnose what the hell was wrong with my back, one of the things that came up in an MRI was an object in my spine. And it was diagnosed as a spinal epidural lipomatosis. Now, when I say in my spine, it's in the spinal canal that all the nerves run up to your brain. And this thing was, I don't know, like 1.5 inches long, I think. It was found on multiple MRIs. I saw several neurosurgeons who said, we can remove it, but it's dangerous, and we don't think that it's related to any of your symptoms. And so we think we should leave it alone for now and just keep an eye on it. Well, 2 years later, I got a follow-up MRI, and it was gone. Just no trace of it. And I asked the doctor, does this happen? The doctor was like, yeah, it can happen. But he didn't seem particularly confident about it, and so I did my own investigation on it. And what I found was a research paper, a medical paper that had been published, talking about spontaneous remission of SLE. And the paper was published because they said this is the first time, the only known time this has ever happened, that it's ever disappeared on its own without intervention. And I'm like, so does that make me number 2? Now, I don't meet any of the diagnostic criteria for having an SLE anyway. Typically, it's people who have diabetes, they're grossly overweight, which I was not. I was very underweight at the time. It's not uncommon for experiencers to have things show up on imaging, which then disappear subsequently. But they continued to do MRIs, moving up my back, trying to pinpoint what the hell is causing all this pain. And they found another object smack dab in the center of my cerebellar vermis. Now, this is the area of the brain located above the brainstem. And here's the MRI. You see, this is pretty weird. The location of this is right in the middle. It's like right in the center, right above where all of the nerves are coming into my brain. It's round. It does not have hard edges. It has been diagnosed as a glioma, which is a brain tumor. The median life expectancy for a glioma is 7 years. I've now been living with this thing diagnosed for over 7 years. It was found 7 years ago. We don't know how long it was there. Before they found it, it has not changed at all during that time. Now, I've talked to multiple neurosurgeons about it, and they're all like, well, we still think it's a glioma. Eventually, it will probably start changing, and then, it'll kill you. Depending on whether I treat it or not, depends on how long it'll take, but it would inevitably be fatal. Ultimately, because it's not behaving as a glioma, we don't know what it is. Is it an implant? How the hell would I know? Like, they'd have to cut it out of my head. I was told if they remove this thing, the amount of damage it would do, I would have to relearn how to, walk and move and things like that. So they're not just going to cut it out unless, they would have to. I don't know what the hell it is, but it's weird. And weird things with my body is the norm for me, as is weird reactions to medications. I've ended up in the ER multiple times for serotonin syndrome, which can be fatal, from incredibly low doses of medications that affect serotonin. And they don't know, the doctors are like, this can't be, this doesn't make any sense. They don't know what's going on there. Most of the medications that I try, I have to go off of them because I have bad side effects. Even if I don't know what the side effects are, I end up with them anyway. It's not just psychosomatic. Look, another transition, a new outfit. That's because it's been months since I last worked on this video. A lot happened in the interim, but I won't get into it because this video is long enough. It's also been 8 months since I released part 1 of this video. I just looked. That's because I ran into a huge host of technical issues, had to re-record a whole bunch of stuff, weird glitches, yada yada. I'm sure you're used to hearing that by now. But thank you so much for sticking around. I hope this is connecting with some of you. I hope it's helping some of you. If you have questions, you're more than welcome to email me. My email address is uapozarks@gmail.com. Just know I don't tend to look at the comments on my videos. I don't pay attention to likes and subscribes and all that stuff. I'm doing this as mostly a catharsis. I'm not really doing it, to make a living off it or anything. Speaking of which, I have some good news on that front. Today is New Year's Day, by the way. Happy New Year's. A few days before Christmas, I learned that I got my full disability benefits after almost 3 years of fighting with the assistance of an attorney. That felt like a very life or death situation for me. And so now I'm looking to try and figure out what my life looks like going forward. So I hope that some of you come along for the ride. Anyway, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much. Please take care and be well, and I will talk to you all again soon. Bye.